Okay, so I'm just going to be working out a few examples here. I'm going to start with number 12. When I look at number 12, what I'm looking, I see, okay, I'm dealing with a cosine curve. All right, that's the first thing I recognize. Um, Next thing I recognize is right away I can look at it and say, oh, I know the amplitude is 1/2 and that the vertical shift is 3. You should be able to tell that just by looking at it. You can see the vertical shift here at the end and the amplitude is the coefficient. Okay, I can also see here that there is no phase shift. So we don't have a phase shift. I don't have parentheses. You need parentheses for a phase shift. But the period we can look at, there's always going to be a period. Our coefficient there is a 1. So in this one, in the whole section, 11, 12, 13, and 14, we're dealing with degrees. So my period would be 360 divided by 1. That's my period. Well, that's just going to be 360 degrees. Okay, so my period is 360 degrees. Kind of typical. Cosine is the next thing I realize, and I'm going to just start here at cosine, go down and draw my cosine curve. And then I'm going to add everything else that I need to add. Vertical shift is always my midline. So my midline is here at 3. From my 3, I'm going to use my amplitude, and I'm going to go up to, not -3, excuse me, I misspoke. I said 3, it's -3. A half greater than that. So now I'm going to go like this, and I'm going to add my amplitude above, and I'm going to subtract my amplitude below. So -3 plus a half is -2.5, or -2.5. -3 minus a half would be -3.5. Okay, so I'm really looking at these points when I'm looking at an assignment to say, okay, do you have all the points needed? All right, we're starting here at 0, and I do the complete cycle in 360 degrees. So the other things I need to do is I need to show my quadrants. I need to show that I know that halfway here is 180, that a fourth of the way is 90 degrees, that between the 180 and the 360 is the other quadrant, which is 270 degrees. So when I'm trying to solve these, or when I'm trying to say, okay, did you get everything right? I'm looking at these 4 amounts. I'm looking for 5, 6, 7 amounts here. 8, 9, 10, 11, 12 amounts. And here I'm looking at, I'm looking at the curve, 13. So there's actually, for each one of these, there's 13 different things I'm looking for each individual problem. Okay, let's do another one. Let's look here at 14. Okay, 14, again, I have a cosine. It just kind of happened that way. I have a cosine curve. But I like this one. Actually, I'm looking at 13. Well, I don't think it matters. I don't think it matters. For 14, our amplitude right away, I can look at it and say it's 5. Our vertical shift is 0. So it's kind of like we have a 0 there, that there's a shift up or down. The period. The period has to do with this coefficient here in front of my x. So my period, since we're in degrees, is 360 divided by my k there, all right, the coefficient. 360 divided by that k is 120 degrees. So my period here is 120 degrees. My phase shift is you set your what's in your parentheses equal to 0. So for that one, I'd go x plus 60 equals 0. Therefore, my phase shift is going to be a -60 degrees. So my phase shift is a -60 degrees. The last thing I do is I say, okay, I have a cosine curve. So I kind of do my cosine curve. In this one, I might even take and go, oh, I should have probably done this to begin with. Sorry, there we go. I should have made it dashed to begin with. So I'm going to kind of dash it out here. Okay. So we have our cosine curve here. All right. So I'm going to go back and say, okay, vertical shift is my midline. I'm at 0. Amplitude is how far higher my highest point is going to be at +5, and how far below that midline, -5. Now, one thing I don't have in here that I need to show is, where is my phase shift? How do I show that visually? And I need to go 60 negative. So where this right here would be at 120 degrees, halfway this would be at 60 degrees, this would be at 90, because 90 is in between 60 and 120. This would be at 30 degrees. I need to shift this whole thing, or my curve here. I'm going to do my curve here. Oops, sorry. I'm going to do it here in red. I'm going to need to shift my whole curve 30 degrees, 60 degrees negative. 60 degrees negative, and I had a lot of people go, oh, it's hard to know how to do that. What I suggest doing, I'm going to do it in green here. I suggest kind of looking at some kind of points, your highest points and your lowest points. And your starting point maybe. You're here, your highest point is your starting point. Each one of these is shifting negative 60. So this is going to be a negative 60 degrees. This point, if I shifted it negative 60 degrees, would be right here. Here at 120, if I shifted that negative 60 degrees, I'd be right here. So now I'm going to draw it in black here for us. My new curve does that. So that's my new curve. All right, so my answer in the end, I'm going to try to make it a little thicker here, is this curve here. All right, so that's my answer. This is at negative 60. This would be negative 30 that it crosses over. This is at my 0 degrees, at 30, and at 60 degrees. So it was a lot about thinking about where was my original and then how did I shift it over. All right, so original, we were here and I shifted it over that way that many times, or kind of 60 units to the left. Let's look at another example. Now we're in radians. So now we're going to look at radians. I want to look at 16 here. And so we kind of have to think, oh, wait a minute, we're no longer talking 360 degrees, we're talking radians in our head. And it's just kind of something important to think to yourself. First thing is, I would really rewrite this, okay? I would rewrite this 16, and I'd say what we really have is this y equals negative 1/4 cosine. And instead of x over 3, excuse me, I would do 1/3 x. Dividing by 3 and multiplying by 1/3 is the same thing. Now I have a k, now I have a vertical shift. Okay, so now I can kind of look through and solve some of these answers. My amplitude would not be a negative 1/4, it's just a positive 1/4. Amplitude is always positive. But I am going to star this because I'm going to remind myself, hey, I need to do this upside down. Okay, I'm not going to start at the top, I'm going to actually start here at the lowest point. My period. The period, in the past we were doing 360 in degrees, so now we're going to go 2 pi divided by the coefficient, divided by 1/3. 2 pi divided by 1/3, what we really do to solve that is we're going to take 2 pi and we're going to multiply it by 3 over 1. So we multiply by the reciprocal. Answer in the end is 6 pi. So my period is 6 pi. We don't have any parentheses here, so there is no phase shift, and the vertical shift is a positive 3. So the way that I would record all of this, I'm going to try to bring that down here a little bit, is this would be a positive 3 here. From that, I'm going to go up my amplitude, so 3.25 here, down my amplitude, 2.75. It's a cosine, but remember it was negative, so I'm going to kind of do this negative cosine. And my period here was 6 pi, so that would be at 6 pi. Halfway would be at 3 pi. Half of that would be at 1.5 pi, and that's okay to put 1.5. Here it would be at 4.5 pi. And I gotta see, did I cover everything that I needed to cover? I think we did okay there. All right, so it was kind of going through everything here. Let's go through another example. Let me see if I can find a good one. Oh, this is a good one. And it's kind of like a reminder here. I'm going to do 17, because 17 is kind of unique here in that we do need to factor out or kind of solve for that parenthesis. So I'm going to start with 17, the amplitude. I can just look and say, oh, the amplitude's 1/2. The period. The period, we're in radians. All right, so it's 2 pi divided by the coefficient of my variable. The coefficient of my variable is that 4 that's in front of the x. 2 pi divided by 4, I'm going to write it as pi over 2. So I just reduced my fraction. So my period is pi halves, 90 degrees. My phase shift. All right, so for my phase shift, what you're going to do is you always set the parentheses equal to 0. So what's in my parentheses? 4x minus pi equals 0. That means 4x would equal positive pi, and x would equal pi over 4. Okay, my phase shift is pi over 4, and it's a positive. That was a positive at the end. There is no vertical shift. It's kind of like adding 0. So vertical shift was 0. Above that was the amplitude of a half. Below that, a negative 1/2. Let's do the curve here. I'm going to do the first curve in green here. It's a sine curve, and so usually my curve would look like this. And this right here would be my period, pi over 2. Half of that would be pi over 4. Half of that is pi over 8. In between pi over 4 and pi over 2 was 3 pi over 8. If somebody's like, okay, wait a minute, how did you do that? I had some people saying that in class. think about this. Okay, that's pi over 8. And what I really need to do is I need to have that 1/8 over here. All right, because that's going to be the same amount there. So I went off to the side and I just said to myself, what is pi over 4? I really thought of it as 1/4 in my head plus that 1/8. And I really thought of it as pi over 8. So it's really 1/4 plus 1/8 is what I did in my head. 1/4 and 1/8, I thought of this as 2/8 plus 1/8. Oh, and then it kind of made sense. Yeah, I'm talking about 3/8. So that's where I got the 3 pi over 8. Okay? So now, all right, the one thing I haven't done yet is the phase shift. So now I have to think, okay, here I have this curve. How do I shift it? I need to shift it to the right, a positive pi over 4. So that kind of, I just did it. I have my original, I do it in a little lighter, and then I kind of make my answer here, which I have in red, a little heavier. I might want to show that, okay, that was pi over 4. Right here would be another, add an eighth to it. So this would actually be 5 pi over 8. Add an eighth to that, it would be 3 pi over 2, which was 6 pi over 8. I don't know where would be like right here. So that kind of shows me where it'd end up and where it would be at that quadrant right there. Okay, I already had my pi over 4 here. I already had my 3 pi over 8 here, and all my 5 different points here. So I kind of graphed everything, and I kind of circled the answers there in red. I think I have time for one more. Let's do 22 here. All right. Excuse me. 22 is a negative sign, so I know I'm going to go down and over. My amplitude is still 1. My period is going to be 2 pi divided by 2, my coefficient. So my period is going to be pi. My phase shift, 2 pi minus pi over 4, I set it equal to 0. So then 2 pi would equal pi over 4. 2 pi. So 2 pi, 2x. I'm sorry, guys. Got to erase here. That's not a pi there. I got the wrong answer there, wrong thing. X. So then my x here is, I had to come over here. X is really pi over 4 divided by 2. Well, pi over 4 divided by 2 is really pi over 4 times 1/2. So that actually turns out to be pi over 8. So my phase shift here is pi over 8. My vertical shift was always let me see if I can move that down. It was always 0. There was never anything added there. So my vertical shift is 0. From there, I have an amplitude of 1, 1, and negative 1. And I'm going to do next is I'm going to do my sine curve. Because since I know I have a since I know I have a phase shift, I'm going to do it in like a lighter color. I'm going to go up and down here. I'm going to have to extend that. What I have here, my usual period would have been pi. This would be halfway pi over 2. This would be pi over 4, half of that. This is 3/4 pi, 3 pi over 4. Okay, and now what I need to do, I'm going to do it in blue. I need to shift that. We have a phase shift, so that would be the original one. How do I shift it? I need to shift it pi, which is quite a big shift, way over there. All right, this is one where you might have run out of space. You might have more space on your picture than I do. But I did kind of run out of space here, having to shift it way over there to pi. This is where I'd go, you know what, it might make sense to shift, I don't know. I don't know how I would do this. I would probably still leave it there. I would say this one right here is basically 1 1/4 pi, or 5 pi over 4. The halfway point here would be 3 pi over 2, because it was 6 pi over 4, which would be 3/2. It ends 3, and then it goes to 7 pi over 4, 8 pi over 4. So it ends at 2 pi, all right, is where it ends. I know a lot of you and some of people are saying that, well, Mrs. Kennedy, why didn't you just stay here, leave it here, and just change these values? In that one, you very well could. So you could say, hey, instead of starting here at 0, I'm going to start at pi. I'm really just doing my phase shift. So then everything gets added, pi added to it. So this would actually be 5 pi over 4. This would actually be 2 pi over 2, or just pi. Pi over 2 plus, oh no, it would still be, sorry, I gotta think of what we have here. So we had pi over 2, and we added pi, 2 pi over 2. So this one turned out to be 3 pi over 2. This one would be 7 pi over 4 because I added a 4 over 4 pi over 4.